The galaxy was ancient, filled with civilizations that had risen to remarkable heights of science and art, yet every advance was shadowed by a single, merciless power. From the rimward sectors to the dense clusters of the core, whispers carried the same name, the Drexler Dominion. They were not builders, not dreamers, but conquerors, perfected by centuries of calculated terror. Where others constructed monuments and academies, the Drexler honed fleets into weapons and turned fear itself into a currency. Entire systems had fallen without a single shot fired, their rulers capitulating the moment a Dominion fleet dropped into orbit. The sight of blackened hulls blotting out the stars was enough to crush resistance before it began. For those who dared defy them, the fate was public and deliberate. Cities burned live on transmission channels, leaders executed before their own people, worlds rendered lifeless to serve as warnings. Their doctrine was efficient: rule not by governing, but by ensuring that rebellion was unthinkable. The Galactic Council, an alliance once envisioned as a shield of cooperation, had long since folded under their presence. Instead of mutual defense, it became a bureaucracy of appeasement, authorizing tributes to keep the Dominion from choosing another target. Great empires of trade and knowledge became vassals, their fleets reduced to ceremonial escorts, their leaders silenced. No species, however old or vast, had ever struck back successfully. Defiance was not crushed. It was erased so thoroughly that the galaxy forgot what resistance even looked like. Stories of annihilation were repeated with grim precision. The Mersati Confederation, celebrated for their shipyards, lasted less than a week once the Dominion turned its gaze upon them. The Carol Enclaves, famous for their biological sciences, believed they could hide across scattered worlds. Within a month, their entire gene line was exterminated. Even the silent moons bore witness, their surfaces glass smooth under orbital bombardments. The lesson was clear: those who resisted were not merely beaten but unmade, their names preserved only as cautionary tales. What made the Dominion unstoppable was not their weapons alone but their control of perception. Every campaign began with the same message transmitted across subspace: "Submit, or your skies will burn." The fear spread faster than their fleets, seeding despair long before the first shot. Neighboring species surrendered preemptively, offering tribute in resources, slaves, and knowledge, hoping submission would delay destruction. The Dominion rarely needed to fight, for terror was their most refined weapon. Across the spiral arms, survival meant silence. No one dared speak of resistance in public halls. Hope itself became dangerous, for even suggesting defiance could invite suspicion of rebellion. And so the galaxy lived under a suffocating weight, its cultures shrinking into shells of obedience. Dreams of freedom were traded for survival. Generations grew up never knowing that alternatives had once existed. It was in this environment that humanity's name began to circulate in quiet mockery. A young species from an overlooked sector, isolated and considered insignificant, they had not yet bent the knee to the Dominion. To most, Earth was a primitive curiosity, technologically competent but socially fractured, unsophisticated, and irrelevant to the currents of galactic politics. The idea that they could resist the Dominion was laughable. Observers predicted their submission would be swift, perhaps even voluntary, for what could such an inexperienced race possibly hope to achieve against the greatest power in the stars? When the Dominion's ultimatum reached Earth, it followed the familiar pattern. A broadcast carried across subspace, cold and absolute: surrender your autonomy, yield your fleets, and submit to tribute, or face erasure. It was not a negotiation, not an invitation to diplomacy, but the same declaration countless species had heard before their extinction. The galaxy paid little attention, for they had seen this story unfold many times. Soon, the humans would be another cautionary tale, another reminder that the Dominion's shadow was eternal. Yet, in the silence following the broadcast, something unusual occurred. Earth did not issue an immediate reply. No message of compliance, no plea for time, no acknowledgement at all. Days passed, then weeks, and still the Dominion received nothing but static. Among other species, the conclusion was simple: humans were paralyzed by fear, unable even to formulate surrender. Some pitied them, others mocked them, but none expected defiance. No one imagined that humanity's silence was not indecision, but preparation. While the Dominion mobilized its fleets toward Sol, certain of an easy conquest, they and the watching galaxy misunderstood what they were witnessing. They thought they were watching another weak species prepare to vanish. They were wrong. Humanity was not planning submission, nor begging for mercy. Behind the silence, something far more deliberate was unfolding, and the galaxy would soon learn that the Dominion's reign of terror had finally met an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. To the galaxy, humanity was a minor race, untested and unremarkable, yet those who dismissed them never studied the crucible from which humans emerged. Unlike civilizations that rose in peace and unity, humanity's path was carved through unrelenting conflict. From their earliest eras, survival was never guaranteed. Tribes fought over scarce land, kingdoms clashed for resources, nations bled to secure independence. Where other species found harmony once technology advanced, humans continued to struggle, inventing ever deadlier means of destruction yet refusing to vanish under the weight of their own chaos. The result was a culture tempered by hardship. They endured wars that spanned continents, disasters that erased cities, and ideologies that threatened to tear their species apart. And yet, each collapse was followed not by extinction, but by recovery stronger than before. Their history was a cycle of destruction and renewal, shaping a mindset that no setback was final. Empires fell, but people endured. When plagues swept across their populations, they adapted. When famine struck, they innovated. Every calamity hardened their resolve, engraving resilience into their very identity. Most alien species unified early, stabilizing under cooperative councils that ended large-scale war before it could scar their worlds. To them, this was progress, the mark of true civilization. Humanity took another path. Their progress was never linear, but jagged and violent, driven by rivalry as much as curiosity. Innovation often sprang not from peace, but from desperation. Machines of industry became engines of war, and weapons intended for destruction later gave rise to technologies of exploration. Unlike others, humans did not fear their darker nature, they learned to harness it. This paradox made them uniquely suited for survival. They were not the strongest or the fastest, but they were unmatched in adaptability. Their soldiers trained in deserts and tundras, oceans and jungles, space and subterranean caverns, always preparing for the unknown. Every environment became a proving ground, every obstacle a challenge to overcome. Where other species hesitated in the face of uncertainty, humans advanced, confident that improvisation would bridge the gap between failure and victory. The Dominion relied on terror as a weapon, convinced that fear would paralyze all who faced them. For most civilizations it did. But humanity had lived with fear since their dawn. They feared storms, predators, famine, fire, and each other, yet they survived all of it. They did not crumble beneath fear, they evolved alongside it. For them, terror was not paralysis but fuel. It drove them to build shelters against hurricanes, to create medicine against plagues, to design weapons against predators. Where fear broke others, it made humans relentless. The psychological gulf between humanity and the rest of the galaxy was vast. To outsiders, peace was the natural state of progress. To humans, peace was precious because it was rare, a fleeting reprieve between struggles. They did not expect safety from the universe. They expected threats, and they prepared for them with grim determination. This outlook, alien to most species, explained why the Dominion's ultimatum did not spark immediate surrender. To humanity, extinction had always been a possibility, and survival had always depended on choosing defiance. Their technology reflected the same mindset. Though not the most advanced in art or comfort, human military research was relentless. In every century, they developed weapons designed to counter the strongest force of the age. Even in times of peace, simulations of global annihilation were studied, scenarios for planetary defense refined, strategies for impossible wars catalogued. The galaxy saw these preparations as paranoia. For humans, it was simply prudence, a safeguard learned through bitter experience. At the heart of their philosophy was a truth forged by centuries of conflict. Victory does not always belong to the stronger, but to the one who refuses to stop fighting. This belief, reinforced across generations, became instinct. Defeat was never accepted as permanent. Losses were endured, analyzed, and turned into future advantage. While others sought balance, humans sought endurance, knowing that even if they could not win today, they could fight tomorrow, and the next day, until the tide shifted. When the Dominion's ultimatum arrived, this history stood unspoken behind humanity's silence. The galaxy interpreted that silence as weakness, but it was preparation. Governments and militaries across Earth did not debate whether to resist, they debated how. No voice suggested surrender, because to surrender would be to abandon the very identity that had carried them through millennia of crisis. They had survived extinction-level threats before, asteroids, plagues, nuclear standoffs, and each time they emerged stronger. Against the Dominion, they would not beg for survival. They would fight for it. Humanity's enemies misunderstood them because they measured strength in fleets and weapons. Humanity measured strength in resolve, and resolve could not be bombarded into submission. The galaxy thought of humans as fragile, but fragility was a misunderstanding of resilience. A fragile object shatters when struck. Humanity bent, endured, adapted, and then struck back harder. The Dominion was about to learn that the quiet species they dismissed as primitive had forged themselves in fire, and fire did not fear shadows. When the Dominion's fleets surged toward Sol, the galaxy waited for the familiar sequence to play out. First came the intimidation, then the bombardment, and finally, the erasure of another civilization. Neighboring species predicted Earth's fall in days, perhaps hours. Many tuned in to observe, not from cruelty but from resignation, for they had seen this pattern too often. Yet what appeared in response was unlike anything the galaxy had anticipated. Humanity unveiled not an armada, not a coalition of allies, but a single warship. At first sight, it seemed an absurd gesture. The Dominion deployed hundreds of vessels bristling with weapons, each larger than cities, accompanied by carriers that released swarms of fighters. Against this tidal wave, Earth sent only one ship, vast yet solitary, sliding from orbit like a silent answer to an unspoken challenge. Its hull reflected no ornament, no gilded banners or ceremonial markings. It was steel in purpose, an instrument shaped entirely for war. The galaxy laughed. Some believed humans were arrogant enough to think symbolism could outweigh firepower. Others believed they were desperate, sending their last resource as a futile act of defiance. The Dominion itself viewed it as insult, an admission that humanity was too insignificant to warrant serious resistance. But humanity had chosen this deliberately. One ship was not weakness. It was message. The vessel's design bore the weight of centuries of accumulated knowledge. Humanity had poured into it every lesson learned from survival, every scrap of innovation forged in conflict, every calculation of endurance and destruction. Unlike alien warships, built to display grandeur or reinforce empire, this ship embodied efficiency without compromise. It was not a fleet, it was a fortress, a spear, a weaponized philosophy of survival distilled into a single construct. Its name carried significance that rippled through those who heard it. The ship was christened Invictus, unconquered. The word was not chosen for pride but for truth. It was a declaration of identity, a reminder that even in humanity's darkest moments, they had never accepted final defeat. To christen a warship with that name was to carve their intent into the galaxy. They would not bow, they would not break. Inside its armored skin lay technologies others had theorized but never risked deploying. Rail cannons that could hurl projectiles at a fraction of light speed, tearing through shields and hull alike. Gravity warheads designed to distort local space, crushing vessels that wandered too near. Electronic warfare suites capable of blinding targeting systems and severing command links. Energy projectors refined to precision, not brute force, capable of slicing through enemy armor with surgical efficiency. Every weapon represented not just invention, but adaptation, each designed to counter an enemy larger, stronger, or more numerous. Yet weapons alone did not make Invictus formidable. It was its doctrine, the way humanity fought, that transformed it into something greater. While the Dominion built fleets to overwhelm, humans built a single vessel to endure the impossible. Its systems were layered redundantly, able to function even when half destroyed. Its engines could operate under conditions that would cripple lesser craft. Its reactors were driven past safe tolerances, pushing output at the cost of longevity, because humanity did not build this ship to last forever. They built it to win now. The crew reflected the same philosophy. Every individual was selected not for politics or prestige, but for resilience and conviction. They were drawn from soldiers who had faced catastrophe and returned unbroken, from engineers who had kept machines alive under impossible strain, from commanders who had mastered chaos instead of being mastered by it. Their loyalty was not to governments but to survival, to the continuation of humanity itself. Each boarded Invictus knowing they might never return, yet none hesitated. Observers across the stars failed to grasp what they were seeing. They thought humanity had miscalculated, that one ship could never stand against thousands. They mistook unity for weakness, silence for fear, and singularity for futility. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. Humanity understood what the Dominion did not. Survival was not about numbers. It was about will. A single blade, wielded with precision, could cut through an army. When Invictus left Earth's orbit, it did not retreat or wait for allies. It accelerated directly toward the heart of the Dominion fleet, not as a gesture of arrogance but as an act of certainty. The galaxy watched with disbelief, some expecting the vessel to be vaporized within moments, others unable to look away from the audacity of such a stand. But as the human warship advanced without hesitation, its purpose became undeniable. This was no plea, no symbolic gesture. This was a species declaring itself unyielding, and a ship forged as the physical embodiment of that declaration. The Dominion expected submission. Instead, they would meet Invictus. The Dominion fleet surged into the Sol system like a storm of metal and fire, blotting out sensors with sheer mass. Hundreds of warships advanced in flawless formation, their confidence absolute. For them, this was routine. They had crushed dozens of civilizations with identical maneuvers, sweeping aside resistance with waves of firepower. The outcome, they believed, was inevitable. Against them stood one solitary vessel, scarred black steel against a horizon filled with enemy hulls. Where others would have retreated into silence or begged for mercy, the human warship pressed forward. The Dominion gave no quarter. Their opening barrage unleashed energy sufficient to vaporize moons, beams of destructive light converging on Invictus with merciless precision. Yet instead of disintegrating, the vessel endured. Its shields absorbed part of the onslaught, but its true defense was movement, erratic bursts of acceleration, sudden vector shifts, maneuvers so unpredictable that Dominion targeting arrays faltered. Humanity had never fought wars by rigid formation. They thrived in chaos, and their ship reflected that instinct. When the return fire came, it was surgical. Rail cannons thundered, launching slugs at velocities so high they tore through shields before countermeasures could adapt. Dominion cruisers vanished in incandescent eruptions, their hulls split apart in seconds. Electronic warfare rippled outward, flooding enemy networks with interference. Command links snapped, targeting displays went dark, and formations dissolved as vessels collided or drifted off course. What had begun as overwhelming superiority now strained under confusion. The Dominion attempted to envelop Invictus, surrounding it with waves of destroyers and carriers. But the human vessel turned the encirclement into advantage. Gravity warheads detonated in precise patterns, bending local space into traps. Entire squadrons were crushed as their trajectories folded inward, ships colliding at impossible speeds. Others were dragged into their own comrades' fire. For the first time in generations, Dominion captains realized their training manuals had no answer for this kind of warfare. The battle shifted from spectacle to slaughter. Every weapon aboard Invictus was unleashed in relentless sequence. Long-range beams carved holes in carriers, while railguns shredded escorts at close quarters. Torpedo bays spat payloads that fractured into submunitions, each one seeking vulnerable engines and reactor cores. The ship moved like a predator among prey, never stopping, never faltering, each strike chosen to sow maximum disruption. Dominion fleets were built for intimidation, relying on fear to paralyze enemies. Against humanity, fear was fuel, not weakness. As casualties mounted, the Dominion deployed their flagship, a colossal vessel larger than any city, bristling with weapons that could reduce continents to ash. It dwarfed Invictus, its sheer presence intended to remind all who watched that resistance was futile. Yet humanity had anticipated this. The warship drove forward, reactors pushed to limits beyond safety, hull plates glowing as systems strained under the surge. Every cannon focused on the flagship, each shot coordinated with ruthless precision. The clash shook the void. Beams from the Dominion Titan raked across Invictus, tearing armor, shattering bulkheads, but still the vessel advanced. Internal systems rerouted around damage, crews sealed ruptures with seconds to spare, engines screamed under stress. And then came the strike. A barrage of kinetic rounds, accelerated to fractions of light speed, slammed into the flagship's core. Gravity warheads followed, twisting space around the wounds until the enormous vessel cracked under its own mass. In moments, the symbol of Dominion's supremacy was torn apart, exploding into fragments that scattered across the system. Silence followed. The remaining Dominion ships wavered, their confidence shattered. For centuries they had believed themselves unstoppable, yet here was one human vessel standing amidst their wreckage, scarred but unbroken. Fear, once their weapon, now turned against them. Crews panicked, formations collapsed, and the fleet retreated in disarray. The Sol system was not conquered. It was defended by a single ship. Across the galaxy, observers struggled to comprehend what they had witnessed. Where thousands of ships had failed to erase resistance, one vessel had carved through the most feared fleet in existence. It was not numbers, not size, not tradition that secured victory, but resolve sharpened into steel and unleashed with precision. The Dominion had built its empire on the certainty that fear always triumphed. Humanity had just proven them wrong. When Invictus held its orbit once more, battered yet alive, it carried with it a message no broadcast could match. The age of terror was over. The galaxy had seen that the unyielding will of a single species could topple even the most invincible force. Humanity had not only defended its home, they had broken the myth of Dominion invincibility. The aftermath of the battle rippled across the galaxy like a shockwave. For generations, the Dominion had cultivated an image of inevitability, a shadow that smothered resistance before it could rise. Now that shadow had been pierced. Transmissions of the engagement spread at light speed, carried by witnesses and intercepted broadcasts, replayed on every world that had once cowered. Civilizations watched in disbelief as one vessel stood against the armadas of their oppressor, and endured. The story could not be silenced, and once the silence was broken, nothing could restore the fear that had sustained the Dominion. The Council, long paralyzed by submission, found itself facing a truth it could no longer ignore. Humanity had done what no alliance, no empire, no coalition had achieved. They had drawn blood from the terror that ruled them all. Leaders who once spoke only of appeasement now argued for preparation, voices trembling with both fear and newfound courage. If one ship could carve through a fleet, then perhaps the Dominion was not divine in its supremacy. Perhaps it could be resisted. Perhaps survival did not demand surrender. The Dominion itself retreated, reeling from a defeat it had never known. For centuries, it had claimed to be unconquerable, but the wreckage of its flagship drifting through Sol system was undeniable proof otherwise. Their empire still stretched across stars, their fleets still outnumbered all rivals, yet the certainty that bound their rule had fractured. Subjects who once obeyed out of terror now questioned in secret. If the Dominion could be hurt, then it could be broken, and that realization spread faster than any fleet. Humanity did not pursue conquest. The galaxy expected them to seize the moment, to expand, to demand tribute from those who had mocked them. Instead, Earth's message was direct and simple: they desired no empire, no dominion of their own. They would defend their world, and if challenged again, another ship would rise. That restraint unsettled observers more than conquest would have. A power willing to fight without seeking domination was unpredictable, harder to negotiate with, and infinitely more dangerous. For the species who had long underestimated humanity, the revelation was profound. They had dismissed Earth as primitive, fractured, inconsequential. Now they saw a people who forged strength not from luxury or unity, but from struggle. Where others grew complacent in stability, humans thrived in adversity. They were not the largest, not the most technologically advanced, but they possessed a quality more formidable than numbers or machines: refusal. A refusal to yield, a refusal to accept inevitability, a refusal to die quietly. Envoys arrived at Earth in cautious waves. Some sought alliance, eager to align themselves with the species that had humbled the Dominion. Others came out of fear, hoping to secure treaties that would prevent humanity from turning its wrath upon them. But humanity's terms remained unchanged. They sought peace, not submission. Respect, not worship. They demanded only that none attempt to strip them of their right to endure. It was a stance so alien to galactic politics that it unsettled even allies. Empires were expected to consume or collapse. Humanity seemed determined to do either. In time, the story of Invictus grew beyond the battle itself. It became legend, retold in whispers and proclamations alike. For oppressed species, it was proof that tyranny could be challenged. For the Dominion, it was a scar that no amount of propaganda could erase. And for humanity, it was not triumph but warning. They knew the Dominion would not forget. They knew the galaxy would watch them differently from now on. But they also knew they had revealed a truth no one could deny, that empires built on fear were vulnerable to those who did not fear them. The warship itself, battered and scorched, returned to orbit not as a symbol of conquest but as testament. Every fracture in its hull, every scar across its frame, spoke of sacrifice and endurance. It had not been invulnerable. It had simply refused to fall. And in that refusal lay humanity's strength. The galaxy learned that victory was not always measured in numbers or scale, but in resolve sharpened to a single point. As the echoes of battle faded, one certainty remained. The Dominion's reign would continue, but never again unchallenged. The galaxy had seen that terror could be answered, that a lone vessel could break the silence of submission. Humanity had proven that survival was not granted by the strong to the weak, but seized by those who refused to surrender it. And from that day forward, every species understood a truth that would linger across the stars: humanity did not need an empire to be feared. One ship had been enough.